Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name's Richard Clothier from Phoenix Datacom. Today, we're going to be talking about automating continuous security optimization. Our webinar is supported by our colleagues at Ixia Keysight, a global leader that provides test, visibility, and security solutions to strengthen applications across physical and virtual networks. As Ixia's Gold partner in the UK, we provide and support all Ixia solutions and can demonstrate them via our Cyber Lab. Test and validation of network and security layers is an area for which we at Phoenix Datacom have helped customers for many years. Some recent innovation from Ixia Keysight now means you can automate the optimization of your network security layers. And so now our colleagues are going to talk about why you need to constantly measure and refine your security layers and how automation can deliver this. We'll also have a demo of how Ixia Keysight approaches this, followed by a Q&A. And please do send me your questions via the chat window. We'll then bring these out for the Q&A at the end. So without any further ado, let me hand over to Andy Young, Carl Flaherty, and John Adams.
First things first, although many of you know some of us or all of us overall, I thought some quick intros would be applicable. Again, I'm Kyle Flaherty. I started in security testing actually back at Breaking Point Systems in 2008, and obviously worked with a lot of the team, including Andy there, to build that business, as well as through the Ixia acquisition. I then went on to a company called Rapid7 and managed the go-to-market for their platform of products and services, including vulnerability management, SIM, and pen testing from that perspective. And I've come back recently at the beginning of this year to Keysight, and my friends that have been here for a while overall, mainly because of what we're going to be talking about today, this breach and attack simulation solution, this market, what's going on from that perspective. But I also get to work with the next person who will introduce himself, although he might not have to a lot of folks on the phone, but Andy Young, and now we get to do a presentation yet again together, 10 years later, whatever it is at this point. So Andy, why don't you introduce yourself, and then John can introduce himself.
Cool, thanks, Carl. Yeah, hello everyone. My name's Andy Young. I'm a security solutions engineer working for Ixia Keysight. My kind of history goes back about 20 years. I've got a bit of a history of working for kind of startups that get acquired by Ixia, and I started off back in 2000, I think it was, with Catapult. But then, of course, the next big thing was Breaking Point, working with Carl. I did disappear for a little while, doing some kind of threat intel stuff, but I couldn't resist it, and I've since come back. So I've joined at the same time as Kyle. So yeah, great to be back. And that's me, John.
So hello everyone, my name is John Adams. My background comes from military satellite communications and network operations centers, so mostly network focus, a little bit of operational security knowledge base. I was lucky enough to join NetOptics about 9-10 years ago now, from which that was acquired by Ixia, of which now Keysight. I was a part of that team, tier 2, tier 3 support for about 7 years. After that, I decided to get into more of a public-facing and better understanding of how our customers were using these products, and have been a part of the channel pre-sales team since then for about 1.5 years. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. So what we're going to talk about today, Andy and I are going to talk about a little bit of where we're at, where we've been in security, kind of the inspiration for breach and attack simulation, not just what we're going to show you overall, but what's going on in the marketplace from that, and some of the gaps that it's filling. We'll hit on that layer 8 challenge overall that we all kind of sense and see, and it's something that we live each day. And like we said, then we'll go to a demo and Q&A. So get Richard your questions as we go through this overall. So the first thing that we always like to do, and for a lot of us, certainly Andy and myself and others, we've been doing this kind of security game for quite some time, a few decades at this point. And we lived in this era of prevention for a long time. We saw amazing solutions, and we still use a lot of them. Our firewalls, our IPSs, all of the things that were built to block, built to prevent those types of things. And of course, we grew We understood, we saw technologies that allowed us to move into more of that detection era. That's where we had our SIMs, our IDRs, our EDR. We had a lot of security analytics, all of these tools that we kind of layered on to this prevention era. And then ultimately security, like a lot of functions in businesses, became more operational, or at least tried to. And that's one of the big things that we're going to kind of talk about today, is this era of SecOps or security operations. And the whole point of it at the time was to, again, operationalize a business function in the company overall, and to break down those silos. I mean, I come from, you know, a long history of vulnerability management. I've been with a lot of teams who would run their scan on Sunday, big report. I mean, sometimes thousands of pages of all these vulnerabilities. Maybe it was classified by, you know, scoring methodologies or whatnot, and then it was kind of thrown over the wall to IT. And you kind of hoped and prayed that that patching would happen, and then you'd run your passive scan again on Sunday evening of the next week, and you'd see if it actually happened or not. And so the whole goal for a lot of us overall was to start breaking down those silos and start to get a lot of that work done from that perspective. And, you know, Andy, I know you've been in this industry for, you know, a long time, as have I overall, and you talk to customers every single day, but where would you say kind of the function of SecOps is in terms of being part of the company? Am I being too pessimistic, or maybe I'm being too optimistic? I don't know. Where do you sit on that?
No, well, I say an optimist, a pessimist is an optimist with experience, I guess. But I think in principle it's a fantastic way of making sure that everything is secure, and I think the challenges are in how it's kind of rolled out. And you know, I think it's pretty much widely accepted that it's the way forward. I started looking at some reports that have been put out there, and they were saying that only around 35% are saying SecOps in their organisation is completely or even mostly established. So there is kind of a problem with the uptake, I guess. And for those that are pushing forward with it, another figure that kind of surprised me was that 52% of companies admit to cutting back security measures to meet business deadlines. So there's always going to be this kind of pushback from the business to try and, you know, make sure that it doesn't interfere, because traditionally it hasn't interfered. It's you know, it's let those parts of business get on with it and be insecure. And now there's a bit of conflict there. So it's not as smooth as it could be, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. That stat is definitely, I think, illustrative of one of the challenges that we probably have in security overall, and for teams and for folks on the phone or listening to this overall. You know, this is the momentum cyberscape, and it grows every single year, right? There's new products. I mean, you know, breach and attack simulation will start to be on here. There's going to be more and more as we grow overall, and these are awesome tools, awesome solutions. They're things that are working for us internally overall. But, you know, when you almost look at this, and even I've seen this slide a bunch of times, obviously, but I'm still I get a little anxious and a little riddled with, like, how am I actually going to do all of this? How am I going to manage all of this stuff? And Andy and I were talking the other evening overall, and you had some crazy stat about the amount of, or on average, the amount of tools that a security team is managing overall. And I don't want to get it wrong. What was the number?
I believe it was 70%, 70 vendors for 70. Large, yeah, for large kind of enterprise and such. It might be, you know, a top end, but you know, even if it's half that.
Right, and you know, the point there, and yeah, a quarter of that. Right, it's the challenge of trying to figure out, you know, which ones are working, which ones aren't, which ones are talking to each other, which ones aren't, from that perspective. So it's no surprise, I guess, that, you know, that those silos have been built up, because it's only a natural kind of inclination, and we're still not getting a lot of the answers to the questions that we wanted from an operational perspective, even if all of these things are working at the same time.
Yeah, and there's no direct correlation between the number of vendors that you have and necessarily how secure you are, I think is something else to consider as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that I think is one of the main questions that kind of overlay this cyberscape. From that, if we darken it out, and maybe I'll lose some of my anxiety because I don't see all of it. But we still have these questions, right? Security operations teams, security teams still have the questions of what do I need? What don't I need? What should I think about? What's configured correctly? What policies should I have? What policies I shouldn't? And I think at the end of the day, the one question that I've always heard from security teams is, I just want a way to measure and, quite frankly, communicate up that what we did all week, Monday through Thursday, helped reduce our risk or make us more secure by Friday. And I need definitive answers to that. And I think that's kind of the operational excellence we would demand of other functions within the company, like like sales or marketing or something like that. Like, they have those tools. And Andy, we were talking about that the other day, of like, sales or marketing can go and actually prove that what we're doing is actually making a difference. Security still struggles with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you could say to an RSM, how's sales this quarter or this month or this year, and they'll have the figures right at the top there, because they've got all the tools to do that, and they'll tell you exactly how they're doing day on day. They'll talk about how the pipeline's doing. If I went to marketing and said, can we do this event? Maybe we want to do InfoSec. The marketing guys will say, well, yeah, last year we spent so much, we had so many SQLs and MQLs, and and that led to so much business, and it's a good thing. We'll do that. They've got all of those metrics right to hand. But yeah, you're right. You say to a security guy, how's things been this quarter, and they're like, well, they can tell you how much they've spent on the firewall upgrade and all those kind of good things that you'd expect. But if you want some really cool metrics, like how are we more secure than we were yesterday? Well, yeah, I mean, they can talk about how many breaches we've had. Maybe that's obviously something that they'd know, but that's only kind of breaches that they know about. That's not necessarily kind of an accurate figure necessarily. There's nothing really to bring that. So they don't really know exactly how secure they are at any particular time is kind of the issue. Yeah.
And that's that's more reactive, right? And I think one of the big things to think about is, while we have this big cyberscape and there's awesome tools in that, and a lot of you are using those tools successfully every day, and a lot of them have reporting, and a lot of them have, but it's about their reporting, right? It's how do you actually bring all of that together, be agnostic to what is actually in your environment from a security controls standpoint, and actually determine what's working and what isn't together. That's where I think that's been kind of a missing piece, and something that we've been kind of focused on in breach and attack simulation is removing ourselves from the prevention or detection stuff and more of the measurement, the testing and the measurement, and being able to kind of look across all of these different types of things and give you that sense of confidence that, yeah, you know what, I did X, Y, and Z, and it actually has helped us. And I can actually prove that, and here's a fancy graph that I can show to my boss or my boss's boss. And that comes from we all kind of have lived this life of vulnerability assessment, again, like being at Rapid7, vulnerability management, amazing products overall, do great things, right? And you can kind of run those as many times as you want. Obviously, active and passive scanning and stuff like that, you have to think about schedules, etc. But it's only giving you kind of a viewpoint of what are vulnerable from an IP perspective, and what do I do with that? Those reports are really difficult. Pre-deployment security testing, that's something that Andy and I, obviously, coming from Breaking Point, being able to see the power of something like that overall, seeing that in the lab, but it's in the lab. Not every company can or wants to, quite frankly, manage a Breaking Point system and do all of that stuff, or even needs that, quite frankly, from that perspective. But certainly the network equipment manufacturers and some of the larger enterprises that have those big labs can show you and really help you out from that perspective. And then pen testing and red teaming, of course, that's something that I think we're all familiar with, but it's a point in time. And I think that's where breach and attack simulation has kind of come from, and it filled a gap where we needed that thoroughness of validation, but we also wanted to do it in a continuous way, you know, from that perspective. And so you saw this, Andy, right? I mean, you've been in this game for a long time, and you saw it fill that gap. You know, when you kind of looked at breach and attack simulation and came, you know, back to the family, you and I together coming back to the Keysight family, like what was in your mind of how you saw this, you know, fitting in the gap? What made you excited about it?
Well, I think it's exactly that word. It's a gap. I mean, this isn't a Venn diagram. There's not an awful lot of overlap there, is my kind of first observation. And, you know, yeah, you're right. I've been doing pre-deployment security testing for a long time. It's a great thing to do. You know, you kind of expect people to do that, and pen testing as well. I've been involved in that vulnerability assessment. But yeah, there is a gap. I've got this terrible habit of coming up with analogies, and for me,
here we go.
Yeah. for me, when this madness ends and we can all go on holiday again, and I want to fly off to Australia, you know, I'm going to be sitting there and I'm going to be thinking, well, that's great. I know that Boeing have, well, maybe Boeing with 737 Max is not a good example, but you know, they've been designed well, they've had all of the design, and it's perfectly, you know, well designed, and you know, someone's been out there and kicked the tires, done the tire pressures, and filled up full of fuel and stuff. You've got enough fuel for the trip. But actually, what I want when I'm flying across to Australia, across, I don't know, the Indian Ocean or something, I want to know, not just did we have enough fuel when we first took off to get there. I want to know at any one time that there's someone up there that's constantly checking and monitoring and making sure we've got enough fuel. And that little diversion we had to do to get around a storm, we've still got enough fuel. The engines are okay, and if there is a fire on one of the engines, they're going to go bang, get out the book and go through it. Right, shut down number 4 engine, shift the fuel from this wing tank to the fuselage and stuff, and they're going to do that, and they're going to do it, you know, immediately. So you've got that constant, continual kind of monitoring. So that's the kind of principle that I see. I see absolutely, like you say, that there's a gap. And it's kind of bringing that stuff we did before with Breaking Point to the live environment where you can do this in a safe, easy, kind of controlled manner. That's what's missing for me.
Yeah, and I like that analogy just because things change, right? Things change during a flight. Things change, you know, and it also, there's the combination of people and technology there, right? There's models being run on the computer, but there's also people who need information and intelligence who can then determine, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm gonna, you know, this happened, that happened, etc. And while, you know, we might not be flying airplanes necessarily, we are dealing with, in security, obviously changing landscapes all the time. And so we could sit here and talk about the new attacks, and we could, you know, and obviously things are growing, especially in a time of crisis right now, you know, bigger and badder malware and ransomware and all of those different types of things. But the thing we always keep coming back to is, you know, this, and I'm stealing this a little bit from John the other day when we were kind of chatting about this, is that layer 8 challenge overall of, and a lot of times it's not done in a mischievous or, you know, evil manner. It's misconfigurations. It's just policies that were never taken off of default. It's all of the different types of temporary policy exceptions. I mean, I can't imagine right now how many temporary policy exceptions there are going on as we're all working from our attics or basements or, you know, quick remote offices from that perspective. I mean, Andy, you were talking the other day about split tunneling and like all of the different things that people are doing just to get work done.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, workarounds have to be made when they're kind of forced upon you, and you know, and if you've got the bandwidth to not split tunnel, that's great. You can kind of carry on with your existing security infrastructure in your corporate environment, and that's great. If you do split tunnel, it can potentially open you up to vulnerabilities. You know, maybe you're going to go to a site because the URL filtering is not implemented for that part of the tunnel. and you're therefore kind of maybe getting infected, and that could pivot and give access, especially with some of the new malware. They're targeting ADs and stuff to get creds and this kind of stuff. But no, I mean, I've been that guy myself in the past. When you say that temporary policy exception, I've had to speak to guys in security and say, can you just quickly do this? It happens. And but before this all started, I was thinking, I used to be in, to go to data centers and stuff. I bet there's guys out there that now we've got the lockdown have said, do you know what, I'll put a machine in the lab and I'll just have it running RDP, and it will be hooked up to those boxes I need access to, and all I need to do is get the security guy to open up RDP, and it's going to happen, right?
Yeah, and so all of those things, I mean, obviously we're in a pretty unique time, so there's a lot of that stuff happening for sure, and the ability to actually, emulate these attacks and be able to make sure that you're still kind of safe and sound when it comes to that is important. And when we get back to work as well, when we get back to the office, can you find all those misconfigurations? Because I'm sure, and temporary exceptions, you didn't write it, well, maybe you wrote them down. I'm impressed if you did. But you got to be able to actually find those things from that perspective. But even day to day, like this stuff happens all the time. And it's why there's that difference between that pen testing or even red teaming versus breach and attack simulation, because things change, just like your flight to Australia. When you take that, things happen as that kind of plane takes off. So one reason, we know these things, and, I just wanted to kind of take a moment of, obviously Andy and I, Breaking Point, right? John, NetOptics, then there's Ixia, then there's like Keysight as a company overall, and our brands that are all part of this has a long history of security testing. I'm not going to give, a huge pitch about the company overall. It's more about the security testing, the threat intelligence, the hands and feet on the ground and minds that, are looking at our honeypot filled with all this different data, the threat intels, both public and private, to basically build all of these emulations, these audits, these assessments that you're going to see that are necessary in breach and attack simulation. And I think one of the stories that Andy and I and a lot of us like to share overall, because this team has been doing this for this long, they have people, all over the world who are analyzing applications, security attacks, vulnerabilities, all of that stuff. WannaCry is just a good example if we think back to 3 years ago, just this month, and what kind of happened from that perspective. We were all, and Andy and I were at different companies at that time, but I remember that day. I'm sure most of you remember that day. And there's going to be more of this, and there has been more of this overall. But if you can take that threat intelligence, if you can take that ability to actually emulate an attack like this early on and find the vulnerabilities, find the misconfigurations, and determine the fixes, that's really where breach and attack simulation is filling that gap. And while we've been doing that at, with Breaking Point for a long period of time in pre-deployment, when you're in, deployment, you're in production overall, it's a whole nother ballgame. And being able to actually test these things becomes extremely challenging from that perspective. But I know, I'm sure you remember kind of that day and working with customers and clients, and it seemed like a scramble.
Mayhem, absolute mayhem. Yeah, I remember it well. And I mean, going back to some of the earlier points, I mean, if you had a network that you were designing, doing your pre-deployment testing as you absolutely should back in 2016, this wouldn't have been around. You wouldn't have tested for it. It wouldn't have been an issue. But hey, come 2017. It is, and now you're in a live environment, and it's a big issue. And you could have a big red team. You could have been in a company that's got the luxury of having a big red team, and you've got guys out there that are maybe constantly looking for threats and building proof of concepts, testing them out, running them against your network, and all the rest of it. That's one way of doing it. But hey, that's what we're doing for you effectively. So you had the chance here 17 days before the attack to be able to assess and mitigate it before it actually happened. So there was an alternative. It's easy kind of looking back now, but this is this actually happened, right? 17 days before it, we were able to test to make sure that you didn't have to be vulnerable to it. But a lot of people were. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's still happening, right? I mean, a lot of the attacks, the malware, the ransomwares that have become famous over the last few years are now, you know, really still active. And it's because it's not always easy to figure out whether you've, you know, configured all these things, all those ports are closed or whatnot, or someone didn't open it back up for a temporary, you know, something or other.
Yeah, and you know, back in those days it was ransomware, and there's been, like you say, many variants of it. Some of the latest ransomware that still works its way around in the same way. You know, it's having to be treated now as a data breach because actually, you know, there are companies now that follow advice and don't want to pay the ransom. So, you know, they make sure that they steal all the data first and then encrypt it and then kind of hold you to ransom for that as well. So yeah, it's still an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're seeing, you know, some very specific, you know, schemes and malware that are coming out. I was just talking to our threat intelligence team yesterday about some updates that are going to be coming out around I'll probably pronounce it wrong, but the Hansator malware and things like that. So constantly keeping you up to date. So WannaCry is a great, you know, big splashy story that we all know about, but there's things that happen every single day that you're going to want to test and you're going to want to, you know, attack yourself basically. And, you know, that's what it comes down to. And, you know, this is, you know, the slide about kind of who we are and what we're doing at Keysight with Threat Simulator, our new product that just came out a few weeks ago. And John's going to kind of show that off and what it means and some of the value you'll get from that. But at the end of the day, you know, if you know breaking point and the ability to emulate actual live attacks, techniques, all the bad stuff from that perspective, but again, that was pre-deployment kind of in the lab. This is doing it on that production network safely. We'll talk about that and what that means overall because it's super important. But really, at the end of the day, it's can I attack myself with all of these things before they do? I can look and find all the gaps. I can see the misconfigurations. And then ultimately, too, I get those step-by-step remediations to be like, all right, this is what you should do in your Palo Alto configuration to protect yourself from data exfiltration. That's like one kind of scenario, if you will. And that's the solution, right? And that's, I think, why Andy and I are back and super excited about what's going on from the breach and attack simulation side. But, you know, before we go to the demo, Andy, what would you add about the product, or, you know, what are you seeing now that you're using it with folks and introducing it overall? What gets you kind of pumped up about this?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things on there that I think it's important to mention. I mean, the deploy and run in a matter of minutes. Yeah, so the principle that we have is that we deploy agents. Those agents are lightweight. They can be on-prem. They can be hosted on the cloud, AWS or Azure. And at the same time, we're also have what we call the dark cloud. So this is all the kind of malicious stuff out there that agents will want to talk to emulate, you know, talking to command and control servers or talking to malware sites delivering malware and stuff. So the important point here is that traffic is between agents. It's totally safe. We're not targeting any kind of server with malicious code or anything. So we do it in a very kind of controlled, safe environment, which is key in a live environment, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's super important. Even with lateral movement, right? It's going to be agent to agent, and it's all, you know, the threat simulator agents from that perspective. So, you know, with that, we'll pause. You know, I think we've done a good job of going through where breach and attack simulation lives, what it is, and why people have gotten to this stage. And I'll pass it over to John to show you what it looks like, and then we'll come back for some Q&A.
All right, thank you very much, Kyle. I'm going to share my screen now. Is everyone able to see the UI at this point? Or Kyle, can you verify for me? Yep, good, thank you. All right, let's get rid of some of this GoToMeeting stuff. Okay, so we're going to go through Keysight's Threat Simulator, a demo to show you how to get started and make yourself a little bit useful with this tool while you can use that trial license available to you. So the workflow of the Threat Simulators is done from this left ribbon from the top to the bottom. You can start from this deployment area where we're going to give you a few deployment options, of which we've already built in a how-to with a step-by-step configuration and perhaps some templated YAML files. And even on the on-premise setup, we'll have deployment scripts available so that in more or less you'll just end up running this as a normal bash script. And then after you providing a name to your agent, the agent would automate its installation and populate into your Threat Simulator dashboard. From there, we're going to move to our topology page where our agents will populate. So as we explained in our presentation before, the dark cloud will act as an agent from the Keysight's perspective to simulate external servers or malicious servers in the internet or malicious hosts in the internet. From there, each agent can be deployed, and we advise generally deploying agents between security zones or areas of which we would have certain devices between these two agents, such as a firewall and IPS. This firewall and IPS would build what is called a security profile, and that security profile would identify what devices are between these two agents. And thus, I can verify if I need to make certain adjustments to, say, a generic firewall. Let me populate this in here now. So a generic firewall rule, so that I can understand what kind of remediations I need to have when conducting tests between these two agents. So as you see a little circle between each of these connections, this would give you an understanding of which items are between these two agents in the path. So moving down, we then have our agents, of which you're going to have all the relative information required for conducting that test, which is the IP address information, and also some extra tags and information such as location, so you can identify if certain agents are perhaps in the same building, but a part of different networks or security zones. So after I've installed my agents, I'll head to the assessment dashboard. The assessment dashboard is the library of all the various types of tests that you'll have available to you. Just to reference, this is an evaluation copy, so the GA version will have a much larger portfolio, and we'll see more of that intelligence come from Breaking Point over its launching. So from there, we have 3 different categories of assessments: policy, instrumentation, and kill chain. The policy type tests could be used, for example, testing web content filter configurations at a firewall to ensure that users can't connect to some malicious websites. From that, we can get into more complicated types of attacks, such as the WannaCry infection, where once again, we're going to give you all the information about how that infection occurs and give you a step-by-step guide for how that infection would be seen from a testable aspect. So you'll see this image of this ladder, and I'll quickly go through this. So we'll have the agents that will be involved, so internal target 1 and 2 in this attack, and the various points of which our dark cloud will be assisting in this attack. So as we read this, audit 1 is originating this exploit from the dark cloud to internal one target, and it's sending an external blue exploit with the goal of installing a fuzz bunch backdoor. If this is successful, I would then just move down to my next audit. Once again, I'm going to originate the request from dark cloud to internal agent 1. And now we start talking about realism. As with audit 3, I'm going to have internal agent make a fake DNS query out to that DNS name server from our dark cloud. And then dark cloud's going to respond with that bad information, but also to the goal of encrypting your hard drive. So once I have my assessment identified that I want to use and my agents prepared, I would head to scenarios. So from the scenarios pane, I would have a list of all the various type of scenarios, so you could see if I'm using certain type of assessments of focus. And for example, you see my top 4 here, these WannaCry infection assessments. The variation between these assessments are the agents that I'll be using to understand that which agents will be susceptible to the initial infection from the dark cloud, and then how could that infection pass between various security zones inside my deployment, as you were seeing from here. So we have a different WannaCry test for each attack vector. So real quickly, I'll go to create a scenario. Once again, you're going to be prompted in a very easy form flow where you're going to get relative information about that test in a 1, 2, 3 chronological format and how we're going to conduct it and where it applies in the cyber kill chain. Very easily, I'm just going to select specific agents and then run and name it and schedule it. So after I've built all the scenarios that I wish, as we were talking about before, maybe in the original assessment, I would conduct this test. I would see that it would fail. I would make some network configuration changes. And I would iterate this a few times until I know that my configuration is where I want it to be. From that point in time, I would schedule this test to continue to run on a perhaps daily or hourly basis. I would suggest at least daily, just to ensure that each day nothing has changed and that environment is still secure. The whole point is to always validate that my security posture is ensured. So we will have these tests scheduled to run on a, as I see here, on an hourly basis, so that I can always ensure that I am protected. So after we've conducted some of these tests, and I'll just get some of these started so we can see some real-time dashboard effects while we're going through the let's say the results. Excuse me. So I started this first scenario, and I've queued up a couple of more other ones in the side, and from there we'll head to our dashboard. So the top-end dashboard, as you see here, is a summary page of everything. So all the types of assessments that have been failed, the agents that are failing, the types of attacks that are failing, and just a general overview of all that information from the tests we are conducting. From there, I can roll into assessment results from the top to now understand how are certain assessments of a certain type done. So as I explained, I have 4 scenarios that I'm using to ensure this assessment of WannaCry infection is good. If we're valid, are we protected? In this, we see that I only have a 20% protection score. So from that, I'll get this information populated below where I can start to understand at which point during this test did I block, or was the block not accomplished? Did we fail in actually blocking this traffic? Sorry, one moment, try to bring down my browser. Okay, here we go. So you can see, for example, in this number 2, demo 5 and demo 6, I was protected when I was doing the initial attack to the DMZ. But if I originated my attack to the branch office, I was able to get in and start to attack the alternative routes to my other offices. Apologies for the web UI, we're having a little bit of slow response. So from that, I can further go inside this specific audit, because as we see, we have the 1 through 7 audit that we were explaining before. So I can go into details and PCAP generation. Let's just give it a moment. Life on VPNs is slow. Okay, so from here I can get a total understanding of what was involved in this assessment and some information about the audit and some of the recommendations. So from the top, we have the agents that were involved in this audit, which would be the dark cloud going to TS branch 1. In between that, we see our security profile as we see an icon for a web application firewall, some firewall rule, and some IPS. Real quickly, I will show you this security profile so you can see how it would show or be observed inside that UI. So we have an Amazon WAF signature where we are currently measuring on, as well as a generic firewall rule and IPS rule. From that, we can come down to our history. So each one of these bars is a audit that was ran at a specific time, of which we can drop down this audit to get information about that audit, such as, one moment, as it would populate, click, there we go. So you will see below that we'll have a lot of the information, such as the IP addresses or the names that were used for the name server requests and things like that, and then just some path recommendations or remediations that could be useful for this type of attack. But of course, we want to make sure that the recommendations are useful for you. So whenever you click on the recommendations tab, based off the type of audit or test that was conducted, we will then look at your security profile, what is above, and then verify which actions can be done at, on your equipment to remediate this environment. And apologies, I'm just trying to wait for this to populate. Here it comes.
Nothing better than a live demo, right, John?
Oh yeah, especially like I said, across
You're doing
VPN.
great.
Well, unfortunately, I have to be on the VPN for an immediate demo after this.
I hear you.
So yeah, I got a little bit of that draw, that latency that comes with that environment.
Not a problem.
It's almost kind of sad for me. I've been running off of, let's say, mobile 4G for the last 2 to 3 weeks. I finally get internet installed into my office, and I still have to work across this slow VPN. All right, here we go. So once again, based off the information that was provided in my security profile, and the type of audit that I'm running, I would then see the recommendations that are relative for my equipment. So in this, we get in some cases we'll have the vendor-specific type recommendations, which will give you links to other documentation. So through this entire experience, you get to learn how the attacks are conducted. You get to find out how all of these different vendors are remediating this environment. And at the end of it, you're going to have a dashboard that's going to be easy for you to always verify with yourself and with your customers that the environment is safe. And I think that's good on my demo.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. I know it can be challenging times right now as we're all moving to work from home, right? From that perspective. So I'll just throw up my final slides, and then we can pass it over to Richard for any questions. So, as Andy and I talked about, and then John showed you, breach and attack simulation is something that we wanted to do. I mean, I remember customers at Breaking Point who would ask us, hey, could you actually do the same thing for a production network overall? And that's exactly what John just showed you and what we talked about. And it's a rising and very exciting market from that perspective. So, we do have a free trial going on right now for a free, threat simulator.cloud if you want to go there from that. And you can go and do, a lot of the work from home tests that we talked about before, URL filtering, data breach, data exfiltration, all of the stuff that we talked about throughout the presentation. So I want to make sure that we have enough time, Richard, for questions and answers. So sure. Andy, unless you have anything else that you wanted to hit on, I'll pause us.
No, all good for me, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, guys. So yeah, we do have a few questions in. So yeah, here we go. Just a few come through on the chat window. So it's not totally clear to me how this differs from pen testing and red teaming. So could you go through that in more detail, please?
Did you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think back to that the diagram where we had pre-deployment testing and red teaming, and then above that was the breach and attack simulation. I think you know, the red teaming is more of a manual kind of process, and you know, I think, you know, the idea of having pen testing is absolutely great. So you know, you want your guys to make sure that you know, no one can penetrate your network, and in many cases, some organisations in some industries especially are mandated to do that, and that's a great thing. But I think the trouble with that is it doesn't really kind of scale to do what we're trying to achieve, which is to have the constant assessments done. You know, the guys that carry out the red teaming and the pen testing stuff, usually, you know, very talented and decent amounts of money, and you know, it doesn't really scale to have somebody sitting there doing that kind of testing on a daily basis. Is the way that it works, really. There's not that many around. This, as you've probably seen, is a very kind of quick, easy way of making sure that you're, you know, running every single assessment that you need to on an hourly basis if you need. So it's, yeah, hopefully that's answered.
Okay, all right, thank you, Andy. And another one we've got coming up. How do you ensure safety of the emulation with the dark cloud and your agents?
So I guess I touched on that one a little bit earlier, because you know, just to be clear, you know, we're not talking about you know, installing an agent on your database in your data center. What we're talking about is having standalone self-contained agents that you spin up on your network, and they will only communicate with other agents and the dark cloud, which in itself is an agent. So it's having that kind of like, it's all self-contained. The traffic goes between those two agents, whether they're kind of between two agents on your networks, trying lateral movement, or whether it's between an agent on your network talking to the dark cloud. It's a very controlled environment, and it doesn't in any way kind of target your actual infrastructure, other than going through your security controls and seeing if it can get blocked. And I guess, you know, it's as well as going through those security devices and making sure that it's kind of achieves its aim of blocking. That was probably quite clear in the demo. But the other thing we have is agents that can talk to your scene. So not only do we just test your security controls, but we're also checking to see that security control, let's say your Palo Alto network, is alerting your scene platform. So we're actually also querying that and correlating it to say, well, actually, yes, we can make sure now that not only do you block it, but you alert correctly as well. You know, some security controls can have default settings where they will alert but not block, and that's something that would be immediately obvious in using this solution.
Okay, all right, thank you. And where do you think would be the best place to put agents?
Agents should ideally go in every kind of network segment, I would say. I mean, the purpose of this is to kind of simulate attacks. You want to make sure, I guess, from what we saw in John's demo, you know, there are scenarios there where, you know, there's different routes into your infrastructure, and you want to check all of those different routes. So I would have agents in every network segment. Certainly everywhere you've got security control in between, you'd want to send traffic. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. And I've got one last one, which is, can I add my own emulations or upload PCAPs to the threat simulator?
So at the moment, we don't allow for uploading PCAPs. You know, what we're doing is generating all of these threats kind of natively, and they will be run kind of statefully from one agent to another. It's we don't allow for uploading PCAPs to do that. So no, it's kind of out of the box.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the 15 years of doing this, and the word that Andy said that I think is really important is stateful. We'll obviously generate the PCAPs for you from our own so that you could use that, you know, and on your own if you wanted to look at that and examine that. But I think that stateful attack traffic is extremely important. That's something you're not going to get from just a PCAP emulator. And it's something that I think our threat intel team is very passionate about for the last 15 years.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Carl.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions that we've got through there. So thank you very much for that, gentlemen. Just one last thing I'll cover off, which Kyle, I think you did as touch on just now, that the threat simulator solution that John just did a demo of is available as a 7-day free trial. So we are here, our Phoenix Datacom engineers are on hand to help you install the trial and help you work through to see the full value of it. So we will be in touch with you shortly about that, but if you'd like to find out more about the solution, then please do visit our website, www.phoenixdatacom.com/Ixia. But we will also be in touch with you very soon. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much everyone for joining us, our colleagues at Ixia Keysight and all of our guests for joining, and yeah, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.